My name is David Pyle. I'm the regional lead for the Mid-America region of the UUA. I am a light-skinned, white-identified man in my early 50s. I have hair that is becoming grayer every day, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a black and gray patterned shirt. And I am at a retreat center in just south of Minneapolis with our Unitarian Universalist military chaplains this week. It is good to be with you. And especially good to be with you for one of my favorite topics, for us to talk about a governance board's fiduciary responsibility. Now, please don't jump off right now. Although you are board members, so you can kind of choose to come to a conversation about about board responsibility. So I am not in my normal home office to do this presentation this tonight. So things are a little odd for me. I think it will be fine, but I want to bring us together a little more about this board gathering series. So each month we're going to explore a different topic of board leadership, with this month being, it says board relationships, with this month being the board's fiduciary responsibility. We used to do this programming in a like a 2 or 3 session presentation, and we of all the different topics of kind of a board basic training kind of environment. And we decided this year we wanted to do it a much more collaboratively as a team, but also to bring people into the material in a way that gives you time to be in conversation with each other about the topics, rather than just me presenting material and in a workshop environment and people asking me questions. And we've made a significant change from how we did this last month. Last month we did have a question and answer time together, where it came back into the big group and did question and answer. We've taken that out this time. And we are going instead giving you more time in the small group with each other based on your church size, and hope that you are in conversation with your primary contact about topics and questions. All of the material that we're presenting, there'll be some links put in the chat a little later, but all the material that we're presenting can be found in the Board Basics course and the Board Foundations course on UUA Leader Lab. And we also highly recommend you think about taking the UU Institute course, which this link will also be in the chat, titled UU Board Foundations. So when I say fiduciary, what comes to mind? You can write it in the chat if you want. What word comes to mind when I say fiduciary? Money. Money, finances, money, money, money. All right, so the money is the first thing that comes to mind, right? But let's be honest. Let's be honest. This is church, so let's be real. When I say fiduciary, what we're actually thinking of is not a lot of money, right? We're thinking of small amounts of money, because this is religious community. We're going to think about fiduciary, however, in a broader sense tonight. Money will be part of it, but not all of it. Also think about stress. That's important. There is what I call the lived fiduciary responsibility of a governing board for a congregation. It's to ensure that all of the assets, all of the resources, all of the assets of a congregation are used for the purpose of fulfilling and achieving the congregation's mission. So just to recenter, it's not necessarily just about money, it's about all of the different assets. And to be honest, I believe that money, while an asset of the congregation, because it's often a smaller amount of money, it's not even the primary asset that most congregations utilize for the fulfillment of their mission. So if all those other assets and resources are far more than money, and many times boards are looking for that particular sweet spot, that particular place between faithful stewardship of the congregation's resources and how we then utilize those resources for the fulfillment of the mission. Congregations exist in the world for the fulfillment of the congregation's mission, whether that be the living the values of Unitarian Universalism in the community, whether that be transforming individual hearts and lives for greater fulfillment and sustainment in a difficult and challenging world, whether that be simply existing in order to hold a presence of progressive faith in communities that often struggle to have any presence of progressive faith or of progressive community at all, no matter. But whatever that mission is, whatever that vision the congregation holds for the world it wants to create, the board's part of the board's job is to ensure that all of the assets and the resources of the congregation are being utilized and utilized for the fulfillment of that mission for the long term. And when the fiduciary responsibility is not tied to that sense of mission, to the board having a deep understanding of mission and call, it can often become kind of an oppressive form of control within a congregation. One of the challenges that some of our congregations sometimes face is fiduciary bodies, whether it's a finance committee or the board, who believes their whole job is the protection of those resources, rather than the use of those resources for the fulfillment of the mission. So why do congregations have boards? Right now, there's lots of reasons and answers to this. There is the fact that the congregation, as the congregational meeting, trying to make every decision that the congregation has to make, is an impossible way. If we had to bring everybody together in a congregation to make any decision, and there are some congregations that have functioned this way. I often say that the congregation's annual meeting may be the most democratic version of our governance, but it is the least efficient. And so having a congregational board is in part a way to have a body that is making decisions on behalf and at the behest of the election of the congregation without being that full body. But the real reason why congregations have governing boards is because the state nonprofit law tells us we have to. Because the state nonprofit law, any nonprofit that is incorporated with a state or is registered with a state, the state needs some body that it can be in relationship with, that it can hold accountable, that it can make sure that it can require is holding that the purpose of the nonprofit, all the resources of the nonprofit are being utilized for the fulfillment of the nonprofit's purpose. And while we have a commitment, polity-wise, that it's the whole body of the congregation that is the ultimate decider, the state, whatever state you're in, the government as a whole is not going to treat the whole body as the congregation as who it is in relationship with. So in most states, nonprofit law defines that the congregations have to have at a minimum officers, and in some states have to have a board. And in many states, you have to be able to tell the state through a incorporation document or through a charter or through the bylaws what your structure for that governance is, so that the state knows, the state attorney general or whoever is responsible in that state knows who to be held accountable. That accountability mechanism is part of a board's fiduciary responsibility. It is not simply to ensure that all the assets are being utilized for the fulfillment of the mission, but that they are also being utilized in relationship to the legal requirements for nonprofits within your state. Now, I'll tell you the place that this most often comes up. It doesn't come up often, but most often when it comes up, it's around property tax issues. The congregations being nonprofits, either as a 501c3 or under the IRS church exemption, will sometimes run afoul of local or state property tax laws, particularly around allowing their space to be utilized by for-profit institutions. And just to say, that's usually the place where I find out that an attorney general or a local property tax assessor is communicating with the board about difficulties and challenges related to a particular congregation. We are living in times where the government may be taking a close look in the near future at some of what our congregations may be doing. And I pray that that's not the case, but I wanted to say it in this meeting because this role related to the government that boards play in holding the fiduciary accountability for their congregation may be more important than it's been in the past. And I will say that some church insurances do indemnify the board and do provide support for governing boards. And some congregations that have, for reasons of church insurance affordability, chosen to go with small business packages that may not provide that. So it's, I think, ensuring that your board members have adequate protection is a fiduciary responsibility of the board. So there's just a little drop-in piece of wisdom and concern from me. So now that I've talked about the legal aspect of fiduciary, what is the board's fiduciary responsibility to the congregation? And I said this before, but you're going to hear it from me a couple times today, and that is, it is to ensure that all of the assets of the congregation are being utilized to fulfill the congregation's mission, building the congregation's vision for as long as it takes to make that vision a reality. Now, to do that, a congregational board really needs to have a deep and shared understanding of the congregation's lived mission and vision. And next month's session is going to be about how boards develop that deep and shared understanding of the congregation's mission and vision. Because it is a requirement. You can't lead the congregation, you can't hold the congregation to the accountability of using the assets towards that mission and vision if you don't have a clear understanding of what that mission and vision is. Every congregation has a purpose. Every congregation has a reason why it exists. And understanding that as a board in a deep way is what gives you the ability to determine whether or not the assets of the congregation are being utilized appropriately to make that vision a reality. And and to to give a little bit for next month, I believe the vision for congregations is the world we want to create if we could create the world. That's what we are trying to build into existence. And mission is what parts of creating that world are we resourced, capable, and equipped of working on right now? So we're going to use the chat for a minute. What are some of the fiduciary assets of our congregation? When you think about what are the resources that your congregation has access to, what are the things that, what are the aspects of who you are as a congregation that help you to live that mission, that help you to live the purpose for your congregation? What are some of those assets? Buildings. Property is one of the big ones. Money, of course. People, both people that are your members, people that are your lay leaders, people that are your staff. Staff time is one of those primary resources. What are some other, anybody else have any other guesses about what are some assets your congregation may have that helps you fulfill your mission? Endowments, congregant skills and experiences, that's right. Reputation. I love that someone put that Margaret put that in there. The congregation's reputation is one of the key because we as a faith tradition, we are smaller than our impact often, and that impact comes from the fact of our reputation, how we are perceived in the communities, may be much larger than the number of people or size. Eric shared name, which is similar to reputation, absolutely. Partnerships, thank you, Martin. That is another one. The relationships we hold and that are part of those assets that help us fulfill our mission. I know when I was a minister serving a congregation in Ventura, California, we had a commitment in our mission to ending homelessness in Ventura County, and all of the partnerships that our congregation held with all the nonprofits and with the government agencies and with the politicians in the county related to ending homelessness was a key asset for us in fulfilling that mission. So the argument thank you all for that. The argument that I'm going to make today is that the governing board has a fiduciary responsibility for all of those assets, not just for money. That all the different things that the congregation has that help to fulfill the congregation's mission, the board is responsible for ensuring that those assets are being appropriately used for the fulfillment of the congregation's mission to create the world we want to create for as long as it's going to take to create that world. And that changes the nature of fiduciary responsibility. If your fiduciary responsibility was simply related to money, although money is often the foundation of being able to support all those other assets, then the responsibility ends related to ensuring that there is enough money or close to enough money, and that the money is being appropriately utilized. But it's more complicated when we think about all of the assets of our congregation. So, for example, I want to let's start with one of the primary assets that our congregations hold, and that is our staff. A lot our professional staff, both our religious professionals, but also our support staff for our congregations. I believe it is a board responsibility to ensure that we are utilizing our staff, that our staff is working in ways that are in alignment with the congregation's mission. And I will tell you that we always hope that staff are deeply integrated in the congregation's mission, but it's not always true. And it may be staff supervisors who hold the primary responsibility for helping the staff to stay in alignment with mission, but the board to be able to hold that primary staff accountable for ensuring that staff work is leading towards the vision that the congregation has set for the world that they want to create. That also that staff is working in partnership with lay leadership. That's a fiduciary responsibility of the board, that the staff is engaging with the congregation and leveraging and utilizing those lay partnerships with lay leadership, and that staff has appropriate support and supervision. So it changes the board's role a little bit when you think about we're supporting our staff by ensuring that they are aligned with the mission, that they are working with lay leadership, and that they have appropriate support and supervision as a board fiduciary responsibility. But it's not just about how the asset is being utilized. It's also the board's fiduciary responsibility is also how the asset is being sustained for the work of creating the world we want to create for the long term. So providing, it's a board fiduciary responsibility to ensure that your staff are being provided appropriate compensation and benefits so that they are sustained in the difficult work of living towards the vision and the mission of the congregation, that they have professional development and collegial support, that they get to go and be with other staff from other congregations and get that both collegial support, but also that cross-pollination of relationship that comes from those collegial, and that the staff gets some gratitude. I've said before that church is one of the hardest places I've ever worked as a staff member, and I've been in the Army for 26 years, right? So being able to hold to that space where there is appropriate gratitude so that the staff is sustained, because it is going to take a long time, probably the fullness of all of our lives, to start leading this world towards the world that we Unitarian Universalists want it to be. How do we keep our staff? But the key conception here is that is not simply a responsibility of your senior staff. This is a fiduciary responsibility of the board. When you understand the fiduciary responsibility is relating to all of the assets of the congregation. I'm going to flip to another one we talked about, and that is volunteer leadership. Oh my goodness, if the staff of our congregations had to do everything that is necessary for us to bring our values and our transformative sense of justice into this world, it will never happen. How do we support it? And this is harder with staff. It's actually a little easier to hold them in alignment with mission than it is with volunteer lay leadership. So how does the board support and set up standards that help to keep our lay leadership aligned with the congregation's mission and purpose, and connected to and calling our lay leadership to our values? and to give them transition and opportunity. Because one of the things that happen in lay leadership often is that, sometimes people stay in roles for a long time. Um, but that means that there's a little fragility in those aspects of the congregation's ministry. You may have one person that's been doing something as a volunteer leader for decades in some cases, and yet when that person does eventually no longer hold that role, there's not a deep bench of people who can hold that aspect of the congregation's mission. The argument I'm making is that fragility is a fiduciary concern for the board. So how do you build into the coordination between different aspects of the lay leadership? This does not mean the board has to do all these things or create them. It means the board has a responsibility, a fiduciary responsibility, to ensure that the congregation is leading towards aligning the lay leadership with the mission. Staff may be doing a lot of that work, while other volunteer leaders may be doing a lot of that work, but the board has the overall fiduciary responsibility. And the same thing is true for the sustaining the asset of our lay leadership. We have a habit in Unitarian Universalism of burning out lay leaders. And because, people feel the values of our faith deeply and they commit, and we continue to ask of them without giving them the opportunity to step back, to recharge. I think that building some ability for lay leaders to be able to recharge, to reset, is a fiduciary responsibility of the board. And how do you pay volunteers? You pay volunteers with gratitude. So ensuring that there are some ways in which the congregation is regularly recognizing lay leadership and giving them permission to move in and out of roles and to be in connection with others. That it is a fiduciary, if your lay leadership is an asset of the congregation, how do you sustain that asset for the long term and ensure it's in alignment with the mission? You all get how this discernment is working now. We've done 2 of them. I'm going to mention a couple more before we move on. Your physical property. We talked about this. This was one of the first ones that come up. For many of our congregations, not all of our congregations have physical property, but for those that do, that is one of our primary assets. It's an asset we've invested deeply in. The only asset congregations tend to invest in more deeply than their physical property is their staff, their professional staff. But to ensure that that physical property is being used in alignment with the mission, this is not always as easy as it seems, and this is a good policy, that not to ensure that renters that are using the physical property are renters that are in at least congruence with the values of our faith and of the congregation. That the property is being used legally and ethically. Now, I will say this is something that congregational boards can choose to take a faithful risk about. That at times we may use our physical property in ways. I was with a congregation during the Breonna Taylor protests in Louisville, where the congregation made the choice to offer sanctuary. And I will tell you, the local police department had questions about the legality of letting protesters seek refuge within the congregation during those protests. But that board made a fiduciary decision based on their mission that they were going to offer their physical property as a space for protesters to seek refuge from the police. That your physical property is being used within and beyond the congregational community, and what lines that means, but also how you sustain the property. Planning for funding and maintenance. A 20-year building maintenance plan is a fiduciary act of a congregational board, ensuring that the congregation knows how to fund and support that building's maintenance for the long term, and provides good policy and practice, and also insurance, which I know insurance for many congregations is a difficult thing right now. And I wanted to name that the UUA is actively working with our insurance providers to be able to make that easier for some of our congregations right now. Another one of the assets we named is the relationship and reputation and relationships. That once again, that the relationships we hold are in alignment with our mission. that they to build community with shared values, to affect change, and to be in accountable relationships as congregations. You know, one of the accountable relationships that we always encourage congregations to seek is with other Unitarian Universalist congregations that they be around. You know, we are not a huge faith tradition. We do not have hundreds of thousands of people across. If we can't reach out to the other Unitarian Universalists in communities around us, we are limiting our ability to have impact together with one another and to be accountable to one another, which is a core of our commitment to each other. And sustaining this asset, you know, maintaining and growing those connections, including, thank you all for coming tonight, your connections with the UUA and your regional staff. I will tell you that it is always much better for me to help a congregation through difficult times when they know who we are and before the difficult times have come. And so being able to be in those, you know, sustaining those assets and sharing those relationships and connections. You know, if you are in a relationship with a community partner in your area and there are other congregations, how do you share? How do you, you know, with one another? And in, and this is also intentionally crafting the messaging of the congregation to build the reputation you want to have. I served a congregation, I mentioned it before, in Ventura, California, and we had very intentionally worked to create the reputation of being the congregation focused on ending homelessness in Ventura County. And when one of the local nonprofit leads, a Catholic nun, told a room full of people energized by ending homelessness, that when she was challenged about why she was working with the Unitarians, and she said, and I quote, "You cannot work on homelessness in Ventura if you can't work with the Unitarians." Building the reputation that you want to have is an intentional fiduciary work of the governing board. And money. You know, that once again, that money, and this can sometimes be one of the hard ones, that money is being used in alignment with the congregation's mission. And it is really the one that supports many of the other fiduciary assets. The support for your staff has a money component to it. The support for your building has a money component to it. The support for your lay leadership has a money component. Partially, it's where most of the money comes from, right? And in sustaining that, inspiring stewardship and commitment, good and effective financial management, and faithful risk taking, which is the thing we're going to go deeper in next month. What it means for a board to look at its mission, to look at its vision, to look at its resources and say, what risks can we take? What does a good, faithful risk feel like? Congregations have many assets. We named a bunch of them today. There are probably some that are specific to your congregation. And it is not the board's responsibility to protect assets in ways that harm or delay the fulfillment of the congregation's mission and vision. The protection of assets is not the primary work of the congregation or of the board. The primary work of the congregation or the board is the fulfillment of the mission in order to create and build the vision that the congregation wants to create in the world. So it is vital. It is vital work of the board. You cannot do your fiduciary responsibility as a board if you do not have the deep lived understanding of your congregation's mission. Sometimes when I teach this, I teach the mission part first, and I chose this time not to. I chose to touch on fiduciary first, to say that unless you as a board have a shared understanding of what your congregation is trying to build in this world, it is not possible to ensure that the assets of the congregation are being appropriately utilized. Which is why our topic for next month will be on discerning the congregation's mission and vision, and on how you then use these two discernments, the discernment about your mission and vision and the discernment about your fiduciary responsibility, to allow the board to take effective risks. So we'll put these in the chat. A couple of links that we mentioned earlier for the programming that the UUA offers for board members and for boards to be able to deepen your learning. The Board Foundations course, the Congregational Board Member Training, and the Strategic UU Board programming.
My name is Lauren Wyeth. My pronouns are she or they. I'm a white person in my mid-50s with curly blondish brown hair, and I'm wearing a black top, some dangly earrings, and I have a pink background behind me and a chalice. And I serve our Mid-America large congregations primarily, and I also serve as the faith development specialist for our region. All right, friends. So as we come back from our breakout groups, I'm going to invite your facilitators, your primary contacts, to share a takeaway they have from your group discussion. And we'll just have one person from each group share their takeaway. And I'm going to nominate David unless he passes it back to me, but he does not have to be the first to go, but he was the observer in our room. And then I know we've got Matthew, and we've got then Kiana, Danae, and Chelsea, one of you. So does someone feel ready?
Just reflecting from our group that there was a sense of commonality, I think, around realizing that there are many assets that need to be fostered. And much of the conversation was less about aligning with mission and more about how do we foster the assets? How do we keep lay leadership, where they don't get burned out? How do we keep our buildings to be engaged and appropriate for use? How do we build relationships? I think a lot of our conversation was around that sustaining of the assets. And then some conversation about maybe we don't have as deep an understanding of the mission as we might need to have under this understanding of fiduciary responsibility. Maybe and so yeah, so I think that's what I would share as the takeaway. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me put you on the spot, David. I appreciate your reflection. Kiana, Danae, are you nominated?
I got spotlighted.
I love this.
So, we talked about two things I feel like are good to share in this space. One is folks in the smalls were talking about the idea of doing micro volunteering or task-based things. Like if I know I got to come in and, do thing A every month, once a month is my task, as opposed to coming to committee-based work, which you need both, but how do you do them in balance with each other really well? And the other piece we talked about is making sure that the task, the committee, and the governance are all in alignment, that you're not having one type of governance, but then you have kind of a committee task spoke wheel kind of model, and those two are bumping up against each other, are not moving in parallel in support of each other. And so I thought it was a really beautiful conversation, and the folks we were with just really shared about the way they're trying to really match where people's volunteer energy is with what they're willing to do. Instead of pushing against it, they're leaning into it.
Thanks, Kiana Day.
Yeah, we had a great conversation in our group of pastoral sized congregations and talked about a couple of different things, but I want to two things to lift up. One is a lot of conversation about buildings and taking care of buildings, but also using buildings. Like, it's important that our building gets used to support the homeless shelter. It's important that the transgender group in town can use our space. We open our space to the college students next door. How do we use our building for our mission? As well as how do we take care of our buildings and keep them safe. We talked about safety as a fiduciary responsibility. We talked about safety policies, like the board saying we're going to have 2 staff for in every RE room as a fiduciary responsibility to protect the children, 2 adults in every room to protect the children as part of our fiduciary responsibility. Another thing was reframing some decisions that folks make on a regular basis as fiduciary responsibilities. How do we make sure that we have the right staffing for what we need? How do we make decisions about when to think about a call process in light of the rest of the work we're doing together? That those are fiduciary decisions which should be guided by mission, and people will be saying, oh yeah, we used our mission to decide what to do. That was a fiduciary kind of question. So it's great conversation.
Thanks, Matthew. And then I'm going to pass it to Chelsea to close us out.
All right, well, thank you everyone for attending this evening, and to David for centering us in the board's fiduciary role and faithful risking. We will notify you by email when the recording is posted online in case you want to share it with other members of your board, and we hope to see you all back next month on November 12th as we continue to explore how we can better serve our congregations and their missions through our board leadership.